for really celebrating this great apologist of the Christian faith. Every year, November 22nd, the church remembers C.S. Lewis in our prayers. And I think perhaps the thing that stands out most for me is his wide appeal. It's such a tremendous appeal across lots of boundaries. And I think as we find ourselves living in an age which is more in which folks retreat to echo chambers, Lewis can be one of those people that can invite us across those divides and into the larger picture of life with Christ. So I invite us into a time of prayer, and hope you enjoy your weekend. By the way, I also should just ask, what is the difference between Irish and English tea? One of those mysteries of life. Water. Let us pray. O God of searing truth and surpassing beauty, we give you thanks for Clive Staples Lewis, whose sanctified imagination lights fires of faith in young and old alike. Surprise us also with your joy, and draw us into that new and abundant life which is ours in Christ Jesus, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. I'd like to introduce to you our MC, Lex McMillan. Welcome.
So good morning, everyone. What a wonderful crowd. Thank you for coming. I'm curious and was asked by one of our organizers to kind of get a sense of how far people came a distance. I know we have at least one person here from Pittsburgh, right? Pittsburgh. Anybody further away than Pittsburgh? I know some folks were down here from Scranton. Where are you from? Eastern Shore. Might be closer, I'm not sure, but that's a nice little hike. Anyway, whether you came from next door or next week, we're delighted to have you in our presence, and I hope that this weekend will continue to be enjoyable, informative, and even stimulating and a blessing for you. It's been a privilege for me to be involved in this from the earliest planning stages, and again, I would thank Jeff Jackson, who's a member of the church here and a patron of this event, for calling me out to be a part of this. It's been a real joy. So it's my job to introduce our next speaker, David Theroux. As you can see, he's the founder and president of the Independent Institute. He's also founder and president of the C.S. Lewis Society of California, and they publish a quarterly journal, which I hear good things about. It's called the Independent Review. He received his B.S., his A.B., and an M.S. degree from the University of California, Berkeley, and earned an M.B.A. at, Chicago? Yeah, University of Chicago. He's written widely in publications all over the nation, from USA Today to the Wall Street Journal to Investors Business Daily, the Washington Times, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and many others. And I discovered by poking around that he tweets at, cleverly, David Theroux, if you're interested. So without further ado, welcome, David. We're so glad you could be here. Look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join with you. It's quite a privilege with so many stellar people like Jim Kono, Michael Ward, and others who are on the program to open up as the first speaker. A couple things I might mention. On the table over here on the left, there's some flyers for those of you interested on the C.S. Lewis Society of California. A note upcoming events that we're involved in. We're co-sponsoring the stage production called An Evening with C.S. Lewis that essentially stars the one-man performance by David Payne, so originally from Britain. I'm sorry? From Britain? Is that better? Okay. So we're co-sponsoring a stage production called An Evening with C.S. Lewis. And there are upcoming performances that are going to be held in Richmond, Virginia, also Austin, Texas, Atlanta, San Francisco, and elsewhere. So there's a flyer on that at our table. Also, there are free copies of the journal that Lex kindly mentioned. This is actually published by the Independent Institute. You're welcome to a copy of that. And also, there are a couple papers by me using Lewis's bountiful work, some of which will relate to my talk this morning. So, one other point is a book that I highly recommend that pertains to the subject of my talk. It's a book from Cambridge University Press that came out just about 2 years ago, called C.S. Lewis on Politics and Natural Law, by Justin Dyer at the University of Missouri and Micah Watson, who's at Calvin College. So I recommend that. I think it's in paperback for those who might be interested. So, C.S. Lewis, for decades, many Christians and non-Christians, both conservative and liberal, have unfortunately embraced an ill-conceived progressive or authoritarian vision to wield intrusive government powers as an unquestionable and even sanctified calling for both domestic and international merits. This is not unique to the United States. In doing so, we believe Lewis would say that a lot of the Judeo-Christian natural law tradition in moral ethics and economics has been put aside. In contrast, the Oxford-Cambridge scholar and best-selling author C.S. Lewis did not suffer such delusions, despite the gigantic and deeply disturbing advances and conflicts of total war, the total state, and genocides that developed in his lifetime. It works. Lewis's aversion to government was clearly revealed in 1951 when Winston Churchill, within weeks after he regained office as Prime Minister of Great Britain, wrote to Lewis offering him to become commander of the Order of the British Empire. Lewis, however, flatly denied the honor, because he, unlike what he called progressives, what we would call progressives, was never really interested in politics and was deeply skeptical of government power and politicians. He expressed this in the first 2 lines of a poem he wrote called Lines During a General Election. As you can see, the quote is, "Their threats are terrible enough, but we could bear all that. It is their promises that bring despair," unquote. Lewis had held this view for many years. In 1940, he'd written a letter to his brother Warren, or known as Warning, quote, "Could one start a stagnation party, which general elections would boast that during its time of office, no event of the least importance had taken place," unquote. And he further stated, "I was by nature against government." Now this is in direct contrast to such contemporary progressive Christians as Jim Wallace, Tony Campolo, Ronald Sider, Brian McLaren, or others, who actually clamor for a notion of achieving social justice through gigantic government powers. One of our senior fellows, by the name of Robert Higgs, is an economic historian, incidentally has refuted the sort of progressive narrative in American history in his pioneering book called Crisis on Leviathan. This is the 25th anniversary edition of it. Nevertheless, given the Zeitgeist's progressive bias, was Lewis just ignorant or naive about modern realities, or was he aiming at a deeper and more significant purpose? Lewis was unquestionably and profoundly interested in the ideas and institutions that were the basis for free and virtuous individuals and communities, but he was not at all interested in partisanship or campaign politics. He instead focused on first principles, not public policy matters, which would be of interest only as they pertain to questions of enduring value. As a result of this focus, whereas the work of most scholars and other writers quickly becomes dated and obsolete, Lewis's work has achieved increasing timelessness and relevance, as the rector mentioned. His books continue to sell at an astounding rate, and although Lewis is best known for his fiction, He also wrote superb books in philosophy and theology, literary history and criticism, poetry, and autobiography, as well as at least, at last count, perhaps as many as 50,000 letters to individuals worldwide. We don't really know how many letters he did write because no copies were made. And the only way we know the ones that we do have copies of is people sent them back in. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Lewis never used a typewriter. He wrote everything using an ink dip pen. So he would dip the pen, write 5 or 6 words, and dip it again. Some people believe that's one reason why his work has sort of a poetic structure to it, just because of the process of writing in that way. His brother Warnie did use a typewriter to help in the correspondence, but Lewis never did. Throughout his work, Lewis infused an interconnected worldview that championed, believe it or not, objective truth, moral ethics, natural law, literary excellence, reason, science, individual liberty, personal responsibility and virtue, and Christian theism. And in so doing, he critiqued naturalism, reductionism, nihilism, positivism, scientism, historicism, collectivism, atheism, statism, coercive egalitarianism, militarism, welfarism, and really dehumanization and tyranny of all forms. It's really quite remarkable. Unlike crusaders for predatory government power over the peaceful pursuits of innocent people, Lewis noted, "I do not like the pretensions of government, the grounds on which it demands my obedience, to be pitched too high. I don't like the medicine man's magical pretensions, nor the Bourbon's divine right. This is not solely because I disbelieve in magic and in Bossuet's politique. I believe in God, but I detest theocracy. For every government consists of mere men and is strictly viewed a makeshift. If it adds to its commands, 'Thus saith the Lord,' it lies, and it lies dangerously," unquote. Lewis addressed not only the evils of totalitarianism, which was rampant during his lifetime, as manifested in fascism and communism, but the more subtle forms that face us on a daily basis, including the welfare, therapeutic, nanny, and scientific states. Quote, "Of all tyrannies," he stated, "a tyranny exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. They be more likely to make a hell of earth. This very kindness stings with intolerable insult. To be cured against one's will and curative states, which we may not regard as disease, is to be put on a level of those who have not yet reached the age of reason, or those who never will, to be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals." Throughout his books, Lewis defended the rights and sanctity of individuals against tyranny, not just because he opposed evil, but because he considered life and freedom and human dignity, including both social and economic freedom, to be essential. Quote, "I believe a man is happier and happy in a richer way if he had the freeborn mind. But I doubt whether he can have this without economic independence, which the new society is abolishing. For economic independence allows an education not controlled by government. And in adult life, it is the man who needs and asks nothing of government who can criticize its acts and snap his fingers at its ideology." As sociologist Rodney Stark discusses in his book, The Victory of Reason, Cicero and others had contemplated the concept of the self, or individualism, and free will before the Christian era. But it was not until Jesus personally asserted in words and deeds the concept of universal moral equality before and responsibility to God, and not until Christian theologians made it an essential feature of their doctrine, that the rights of each and every individual were championed and slavery was condemned. This bold thinking, advancing in thinking, arose in part from the revolutionary insight of what some call methodological individualism in the study of human behavior. wherein the individual is considered primary. As John Elster noted, quote, "The elementary unit of social life is individual human action. To explain social institutions and social change is to show how they arise as a result of the actions and interactions of individuals. This view, often referred to as methodological individualism, is, in my view, trivially true. The contrast to methodological individualism is methodological collectivism as a way to study human beings." The Austrian school economist Mary Rothbard similarly wrote, quote, "The fundamental axiom then for the study of man is the existence of individual consciousness," unquote. The economist Ludwig von Mises further noted that, quote, "The collective has no existence in reality but in the actions of individuals. It comes into existence by ideas that move individuals to behave as members of a definite group, and it goes out of existence when the persuasive power of these ideas subside," unquote. And Stark has pointed out that although almost every other early culture and religion viewed human society in terms of the tribe, the polis, or collective, quote, "It is the individual who is the focus of Christian political thought, and this in turn explicitly shaped the views of later European political philosophers. This focus produced a radical change in the world where, despite notable but limited exceptions of political decentralization, slavery and nearly universal unwielding despotism had ruled, where people were treated as mere members of a group without rights. With Christianity, each and every person is a child of God, or a holy object, who has free will and human dignity, and is individually responsible for the choices he or she makes. In this tradition, Thomas Aquinas stated, quote, "A man can direct and govern his own actions also. Therefore, the rational creature participates in the divine providence not only in being governed, but also in governing," unquote. Working from this Christian background, Lewis stressed the importance of the natural law of moral ethics, a code of moral conscience that is inescapable and defines every person as human. Such morality exists on its own, independent of subjective choices or experiences, just as one may grasp the inherent truism of mathematics or natural physical laws such as gravity. Lewis drew on the natural law insights of such thinkers as the Apostle Paul, Augustine, Magnus, Aquinas, Cicero, Grotius, Blackstone, Acton, Locke, Madison, and so on. And he considered modernist dismissals of such work to be fundamentally erroneous. In particular, both Aquinas' notion of common sense, quote unquote, as described in his Summa Theologica, and the legacy of rational theism found in Jewish, Islamic, Christian, and certain pagan writers, the core philosophical system of the West, had a powerful effect on Lewis. To him, the culture of quote-unquote modernism is not just an historical aberration of this common sense, but a profound threat to the pursuit of truth, goodness, and civilization itself. This common sense, or Lewis's notion of common rationality, consisted in part of each individual human being's intrinsic understanding of an objective, universal, and natural legal order of truth and morality, the natural law, or what Lewis called the Tao. The Tao, incidentally, has nothing to do with Taoism. Instead, the Tao Lewis refers to the idea of the way, or the truth, or the principles. For Lewis, each individual responds to it can come to know and experience this eternal reality of truth. It is a common knowledge, as Lewis said. This insight is similar to Adam Smith's view, as expressed in his 1759 book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, that individuals are born with an innate moral conscience and quote-unquote sympathy for the well-being of others and can maintain them by following the natural law. Lewis likewise claimed that if a man will go into a library and spend a few days with the Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, he will soon discover the massive unanimity of the practical reason of man. From the Babylonian hymn to Samos, from the laws of Manu, the Book of the Dead, the Analects of Confucius, the Stoics, the Platonists, from Australian Aborigines, and so forth, he will affect the same triumphantly monotonous denunciation of oppression, murder, treachery, and falsehood, the same injunctions of kindness to the aged, the young, and the weak, of almsgiving, and impartiality and honesty. He may be a little surprised, I certainly was, to find that precepts of mercy are more frequent than precepts of justice. But he will no longer doubt that there is such a thing as the law of nature. The pretense that we were presented with a mere chaos is simply false, and should be contradicted in season and out of season wherever it is met. Far from finding a chaos, we find exactly what we should expect if good is indeed something objective, and reason the organ whereby it is apprehended, unquote. Lewis noted that what is common to all concepts is something crucial. Quote, it is the doctrine of objective value, the belief that certain attitudes are really true, and others are really false, to the kind of thing the universe is and the kind of things we are. No emotion is in itself a judgment. In that sense, all emotions and sentiments are illogical, but they can be reasonable or unreasonable as they conform to reason or fail to conform. The heart never takes the place of the head, but it can and should obey it, unquote. Lewis argued that the natural moral law is known to all, and this natural moral code is inescapable. It is the basis for all moral judgments. Its foundational truths, such as, quote, caring for others is a good thing, good should be done and evil avoided, dying for a righteous cause is a noble thing, are understood regardless of experience, just as we know that 2 + 2 is 4. As the Apostle Paul stated, when Gentiles do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law, since they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts not accusing, not even defending them, unquote. In his book, The Discarded Image, Lewis showed that Paul's statement completely conforms with the view that morality is determined by, quote unquote, right reason, or the Stoic idea of natural law. Here's Lewis again. The Stoics believed in a natural law which all rational men, in virtue of their rationality, saw to be binding on them. St. Paul's statement in Romans that there is a law written in their hearts, even of the Gentiles who do not know the law, is in conformity with the Stoic conception, and would for centuries be so understood. Nor during these centuries would the word hearts have had merely emotional associations. The Hebrew word for which St. Paul represents by cardia would more nearly be translated into the word mind, unquote. Lewis posed similar arguments in his books, The Problem of Pain and Christian Reflections. However, like all natural law proponents, he was careful to note that natural law does not afford easy or precise solutions to all questions. Echoing Aristotle, he noted that, quote, moral decisions do not admit mathematical certainty, unquote. Of central importance in Lewis's discussion of natural law is his critique of the moral relativism of utilitarianism as a theory of ethics and guide to behavior. Quote, the end justifies the means. Lewis claimed that the precepts of moral ethics cannot just be innovated or improvised as we go along. Picking and choosing among the code of the Tao is inherently foolish and harmful. He noted, for example, that attempts to define moral ethics as a product of a physicalism of survival and instinct create a profound dilemma. On the one hand, the utilitarianism or the innovator, utilitarian or the innovator as Lewis called him, tries to make judgments of the value of human choices by claiming that one decision is good or not. But on what basis is this valuation made, if the only standard that exists is instinct? Lewis shows that all such variations necessarily must use an objective standard of the Tao to do so, even if only partially. As he stated, quote, the innovator rates high the claims of prosperity. He cannot get any valid claim for prosperity out of instinct or in the modern sense, reason. He is really deriving our duty to posterity from the Tao, or duty to do good to all, which is the axiom of practical reason. And our duty to do good to our descendants is clear deduction from it. But then in every form of the Tao, which has come down to us, side by side with the duty to children and descendants, lies the duty to parents and ancestors. But what right do we reject one and accept the other? The innovator may place economic value first. To get people fed and clothed is a great end. In pursuit of it, scruples about justice and good faith may be put aside. The Tao, of course, agrees with him about the importance of getting people fed and clothed. Unless the innovator were himself using the Tao, he could never have learned of such a duty of justice and good faith, which he's ready to debunk. What is his warrant? He may be a jingoist, a racialist, an extreme nationalist, who maintains that the advancement of his own people is the object to which all else ought to yield. But no kind of factual observation and no appeal to instinct will give him a ground for this opinion. Once more, he is in fact deriving it from the Tao. A duty to our own kin because they are our own is a part of traditional morality. But side by side with it in the Tao and limiting it lie the inflexible demands of justice and the rule that in the long run, all men are our brothers, unquote. Lewis hence described the natural law as a cohesive and interconnected objective standard of right behavior. Here's Lewis again. Quote, "This thing which I've called for convenience the Tao, and which others may call natural law or traditional morality, or the first principles of practical reason, or the first platitudes, is not one among a series of systems of value. It is the source of all value judgments. If it is rejected, all values are rejected. If any value is retained, it is retained. The effort to refute it and raise a new system of value in its place is self-contradictory. There has never been and never will be a radically new judgment of value in the history of the world. What purport to be new systems, as they now call ideologies, all consist of fragments from the Tao itself. If my duty to my parents is a superstition, then so is my duty to posterity. If justice is a superstition, then so is my duty to my country or my race. If the pursuit of scientific knowledge is a value, then so is conjugal fidelity," unquote. Lewis then asked, if no new system of value judgment aside from natural law can be developed, does that mean that no progress in our perception of value can ever take place? That we are bound down forever to an unchanging code given once and for all? Lewis's answer is, if we lump them together, as I've done, the traditional moralities of East and West, the Christian, the pagan, and the Jew, shall we not find contradictions and some absurdities? This is Lewis's response. I admit all this. Some criticism, some removal of contradictions, even some real developments is required. But the Nietzschean ethic can be accepted only if we are willing to scrap traditional morals as a mere error, and then put ourselves in a position where we can find no ground for any value judgments at all. From within the Tao itself comes the only authority to modify the Tao. Unquote. Now, as a proponent of natural law, Lewis was a supporter of the law of equal liberty, but a firm critic of imposed egalitarianism for any reason. He further understood that egalitarianism is too often a cloak for envy, the sin of coveting, and that such appeals for regimentation themselves are tyrannical. Here's Lewis. The demand for equality has two sources. One of them is among the noblest, the other is the basis of human emotions. The noble source is the desire for fair play, but the other source is the hatred of superiority. Equality outside mathematics is a purely social conception. It applies to man as a political and economic animal. It has no place in the world of the mind. Beauty is not democratic. She reveals herself more to the few than to the many, more to the persistent and disciplined seekers than to the many, more to the persistent and disciplined seekers than to the careless. Virtue is not democratic. She is achieved by those who pursue her more hotly than most men. Truth is not democratic. She demands special talents, uniqueness is divinely ordained. Quote, "It is idle to say that men are of equal value. If value is taken in a worldly sense, if we mean that all men are equally useful or beautiful or good or entertaining, then this is nonsense. If there is equality, it is in his love, not in us. In this way, then, the Christian life defends the single personality from the collective, not by isolating him, but by giving him the status of an organ in the mystical body." Unquote. Lewis rejected the determination of both genetic and environmental causality for mankind. In the so-called modernist perspective, man is not viewed as a moral agent, but as an entity that is conditioned solely by non-rational causes. And all that counts is not what is just, but the utilitarian what works. If man has free will and is considered accountable for his actions, there are limits on the state's power. But if individuals act out of necessity, they are not moral agents. In the place of punishment for wrongdoing, preemption becomes the means of social control. As championed by authoritarians of both left and right, the state simply eliminates the individual's choice, or more exactly, makes the choice for him or her. And this elimination is the basis for the precautionary principle and government measures of so-called prior restraint. Lewis discussed this problem at length in his book, The Abolition of Man, as well as in various essays, including his essay, The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment, in his book, God in the Dark. Lewis consequently drew a clear distinction between the reality of the importance of individual liberty and the tendencies to fall prey to the absurdities and dangers of collectivism. He states that, quote, "The first of these tendencies is the growing exaltation of the collective and the growing indifference to persons. If one were inventing a language for sinless beings who love their neighbors as themselves, it would be appropriate to have no words for my, I, and other personal pronouns and inflections. In other words, no difference between two opposite solutions of the problem of selfishness, between love, which is a relationship between persons, and the abolition of persons. Nothing but a thou can love, and a love and a thou can exist only for an I. A society in which no one was conscious of himself as a person over against other persons, where none could say, I love you, would indeed be free from selfishness, but not through love. It would be unselfish as a bucket of water is unselfish. In such a case, the individual does not matter. And therefore, when we really get going, it will not matter what you do to an individual. Here's Lewis again. Secondly, we have the emergence of the party in the modern sense, the fascists, Nazis, or communists. What distinguishes this from the political parties of the 19th century is the belief of its members that they are not merely trying to carry out a program, but are obeying an important force, that nature or evolution or the dialectic or the race is carrying them on. This tends to be accompanied by two beliefs. The belief that the process which the party embodies is inevitable, and the belief that the forwarding of this process is the supreme duty and abrogates all ordinary moral laws. In this state of mind, men can become devil worshippers in the sense that they no longer have honor, as well as obey their own vices. All men at times obey their vices, but it is when cruelty, envy, and lust of power appear as the commands of a great supernatural, superpersonal force that they can be exercised with self-approval. Lewis understood that without this necessary natural law framing of social, legal, and political culture, mankind would no longer be recognized as worthy of rights or even common decency, but instead would be left defenseless to any and all forms of oppression. Quote, "For if I'm not deceived, we are all at this moment helping to decide whether humanity shall retain all that has hitherto made humanity worth preserving, or whether we must slide down into the subhumanity imagined by Mr. Aldous Huxley and George Orwell and partially realized in Hitler's Germany." Unquote. We hence are the basis for the scientistic brave new world in which the citizen and government become slave and master. Exactly what Lewis criticized in his essay, Is Progress Possible? Willing Slaves of the Welfare State, also in his book, God in the Dock. And of course, what all of this means is the elimination of what makes mankind human in the first place. As Lewis explained the problem, quote, the question has become whether we can discover any way of submitting to the worldwide paternalism of a technocracy without losing all personal privacy and independence. Is there any possibility of getting the super welfare state's honey and avoiding the sting? Let us make no mistake about the sting. To live his own life in his own way, to call his house his castle, to enjoy the fruits of his own labor, to educate his children as his conscience directs, to save for prosperity after his death. These are wishes deeply ingrained in civilized man, unquote. The theme recurs throughout Lewis's work, including in both his fiction and nonfiction. For example, in the third volume of his space trilogy, entitled That Hideous Strength, he describes a disturbing world in which a scientific elite creates a totalitarian system in order to coercively engineer a new mankind via the so-called National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, or NICE for short. The bureaucrats and planners of NICE are exactly what he earlier attacked in his book, The Abolition of Man. In Lewis's novel, The Screwtape Letters, the demonic Screwtape instructs his pupil Wormwood to mislead his human patient by using the convoluted, progressive concept of, quote-unquote, social justice, in order to twist what appears to be good into evil and seduce the person into sin. Here is Screwtape. On the other hand, we do want, and we want very much, to make men treat Christianity as a means, preferably, of course, as a means to their own advancement. But failing that, as a means to anything, even to social justice. The thing to do is to get a man at first to value social justice as a thing which the enemy, God, demands, and then work on to the stage at which he values Christianity, because if he produces social justice, for the enemy will not be used as a convenience, unquote. For Lewis, science should be a quest for knowledge, and his concern was that in the modern era, science is too often used instead as a quest by some for power over others. Lewis did not dispute that science is an immensely important tool to understand the natural world, but his larger point is that science cannot tell us anything that is ultimately important regarding what choices we should make. In other words, Lewis shows that what is does not indicate what ought. Scientists on their own are not able to address moral ethics, and all social and political questions are exclusively questions of morality. Lewis furthermore viewed as non-science, or scientism, all those disciplines that attempt to replicate the scientific method to analyze man. Quote, the new oligarchy must more and more base its claims to plan on its claim to knowledge. If we are to be mothered, mother knows best. Technocracy is the form to which a planned society must tend. Now, I dread specialists in power because they are specialists speaking outside their special subjects. Let scientists tell us about science. But government involves questions about the good for man and justice and what things are worth having and at what price. And on these, the scientific training gives a man's opinion no added value, unquote. Lewis dreaded government in the name of science even more. For him, the connection was clear. Quote, that is how tyrannies come in, unquote. In every age, the men who want us under their thumb, if they have any sense, will put forward the particular pretension which the hopes and fears of that age render most potent. We must give full weight to the claim that nothing but science, and science globally applied and therefore unprecedented government controls, can produce full bellies and medical care for the whole human race. Nothing, in short, but a world welfare state. It is a full admission of these truths which impresses upon us the extreme peril of humanity at present. We have on the one hand a desperate need, hunger, sickness, and dread of war. We have on the other the conception of something that might meet it, omnipotent global technocracy. Are Are not these the ideal opportunities for enslavement? The question about progress has become the question whether we can discover any way of submitting to the worldwide paternalism of a technocracy without losing all personal privacy and independence. All that can really happen is that some men will take charge of the destiny of others. They will simply be men, none perfect, some greedy, cruel, and dishonest. The more completely we are planned, the more powerful they will be. Have we discovered some new reason why this time power should not corrupt, as done before, unquote? The Marxist biologist J.B.S. Haldane questioned Lewis for such views and attacked him for being anti-science and against a planned world in Lewis's book, The Space Trilogy. Here's Haldane. Mr. Lewis's idea is clear enough. The application of science to human affairs can only lead to hell, unquote. Lewis wrote the following in reply. It certainly is an attack, if not on scientists, yet on something which might be called scientism, a certain outlook on the world which is casually connected with the popularization of the sciences, though it is much less common among real scientists than among their readers. It is, in a word, the belief that the supreme moral end is the perpetuation of our own species, and that this is to be pursued even if, in the process of being fitted for survival, our species has to be stripped of all those things for which we value it, of pity, of happiness, and of freedom. Under modern conditions, any effective invitation to hell will certainly appear in the guise of scientific planning, as Hitler's regime in fact did. My fears of such a tyranny will seem to the professor either insincere or pusillanimous. For him, the danger is in the opposite direction, in the chaotic selfishness of individualism. I must try to explain why I fear the disciplined cruelty of some ideological oligarchy. The professor has his own explanation of this. He thinks I am unconsciously motivated by the fact that I, quote, stand to lose by social change. And indeed, it would be hard for me to welcome a change, which might well consign me to a concentration camp, unquote. As a form of government most consistent with his study of natural law and the nature of man, Lewis settled on democracy, not majoritarianism, but self-government, as in Alexis de Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America. He considered it the least bad political structure. It should be established only in order to limit centralized power. Quote, I'm a Democrat because I believe in the fall of man, or more precisely, that man is free to choose good and evil. He realized, though, that most people are Democrats for the opposite reason. A great deal of democratic enthusiasm descends from the ideas of people like Rousseau, who believed in democracy because they thought mankind so wise and good, and that everyone deserved a share in the government. The danger of defending democracy on those grounds is that they're not true. I find that they're not true without looking further than myself. I don't deserve a share in governing a hen roost, much less a nation. Nor do most people, all the people who believe advertisements and think in catchwords and spread rumors. The real reason for democracy is just the reverse. Man is so fallen that no man can be trusted with unchecked power over his fellows. Aristotle said that some people were only fit to be slaves, but I reject slavery because I see no men fit to be masters. In his book, The Weight of Glory, he similarly noted the need to radically constrain the powers of government. Paraphrasing Lord Acton's axiom on the corrupting influence of power, quote, I do not believe that God created an egalitarian world. Since we have sinned, we have found, as Lord Acton says, that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Theocracy has been rightly abolished, not because it is bad that priests should govern ignorant laymen, but because priests are wicked men like the rest of us, unquote. But Lewis understood that democracy, if unchecked, becomes egalitarianism and will trample on liberty as the collective force for evil by celebrating pride and envy as it fosters tyranny. Lewis's demonic screw tape, which you see in the screen on to the right, this time a screw tape proposes a toast, once again explains quite eloquently how this very thing has happened historically, even the supposed pursuit of liberty. Quote, hidden in the heart of this striving for liberty, there was also a deep hatred of personal freedom. Again, this is Scrute. That invaluable man Rousseau first revealed it. In his perfect democracy, only the state religion is permitted and slavery is restored. And the individual is told that he is really will, though he didn't know it, whatever the government tells him to do. From that starting point, via Hegel, another indispensable propagandist on our side, we easily contrived both the Nazi and the communist state. Even in England, we were pretty successful. I heard the other day that in that country, a man could not, without a permit, cut down his own tree with his own axe, make it into planks with his own saw, and use the planks to build a tool shed in his own garden. Unquote. At the root of the developing tyranny of the things many people may least expect, democracy and egalitarianism. Lewis again. Democracy is the word with which you must lead them by the nose. And of course, it is connected with the political ideal that men should be equally treated. You then make a stealthy transition in their minds from this political ideal to a factually belief that men are equal, especially the man you are working on. As a result, you can use the word democracy to sanction in his thought the most degrading and also the least enjoyable of human feelings. You can get him to practice not only without shame, but with a glowing, positive glow of self-approval, conduct which, undefended by the magic world, would be universally derided. Dunces and idlers must be made to feel inferior to intelligent and industrious pupils. That would be undemocratic, must not be allowed. But anyway, the teachers, or should I say nurses, will be far too busy reassuring the dunces and patting them on the back to waste any time on real teaching. This would not follow unless all education became state education. Penal taxes designed for that purpose are liquidating the middle class. The class we are prepared to save and spend and make sacrifices in order for their children to be privately educated. Unquote. Above all, Lewis was a keen observer of the world he lived in, consistently recognizing the implications of every development in the galloping socialism of post-World War II England. Here's Lewis again. The political philosophy implicit in most modern communities has stolen on us unawares. 2 wars created vast curtailments of liberty, and we have grown though grumblingly accustomed to our chains. The increasing complexity and precariousness of our modern life has forced government to take over many spheres of influence and activity once left to choice or chance. Our intellectuals have surrendered first to the slave philosophy of Hegel, then to Marx, finally to the linguistic analysts. As a result, classical political theory with its Stoic Christian and juristic key concepts of natural law, the value of liberty, of the individual, the rights of man has died. The modern state exists not to protect our rights, but to do us good, or make us good, anyway, to do something to us, or to make us something. Hence the new name leaders for those who were once considered rulers. We are less subjects than their wards, pupils, or domestic animals. There is nothing left of which we can say to them, mind your own business. Our whole lives are their business. Now, in direct contrast to the moral relativism, utilitarianism, collectivism, and authoritarianism that we have seen in the modern world, profound lessons from Lewis's extensive writings pertaining to liberty are absolutely clear and of the utmost importance to every contemporary man and woman. Here's Lewis. It is in man's power to treat himself as a mere natural object, and his judgments of value as raw material for scientific manipulation to alter at will. The real objection is that if man chooses to treat himself as raw material he will be, not raw material to be manipulated as he fondly imagined by himself, but by mere appetite, that is, mere nature, in the person of his dehumanized conditioners. Either we are rational spirit obliged forever to obey the absolute values of the Tao, or else we are mere nature to be kneaded and cut into new shapes for the pleasures of masters who must, by hypothesis, have no motive but their natural impulses, which of course, that's all they would have as well. Only the Tao provides a common human law of action which can overarch rulers and rule alike. A domestic belief in objective value is necessary to the very idea of a rule which is not tyranny or an obedience which is not slavery. The process which, if not checked, will abolish man goes on apace among communists and democrats, no less than among fascists. The methods at first differ in brutality, but many a wild-eyed scientist, many a popular dramatist, many an amateur philosopher in our midst means in the long run just the same as Nazi rulers of Germany. In Lewis' book series, The Chronicles of Narnia, his best-selling works, which are somewhere in the range of 150 million sets, have been sold. The land of Narnia is held in place by the sacred deep magic or natural law. And to transgress this moral code is to do evil. Toward the end of the first book in the series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which, as many of you know, was made into a highly successful 2005 film, the children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, assume their rightful thrones as kings and queens of Narnia. Lewis described how they governed during the golden age of Narnia and their most important accomplishments. Quote, as they made good laws and kept the peace, and liberated young dwarfs and young satyrs from being sent to school, and generally stopped busybodies and interferers, and encouraged ordinary people who wanted to live and let live. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Where does impulsivity fit into this?
Impulsivity? Well, Lewis was, you mean instinct or just
Not instinct,
acting
not
without
hunch,
thinking?
but impulse.
Okay, well, that's part of the human condition. People respond to situations without consideration. It may be motivated by anger or lust and all sorts of things, right? So Lewis, in his book, The Abolition of Man, the first chapter is called Men Without Chests. And he gets this idea from the Greek notion of the human person being made of three components: the head, the heart, and the stomach. So the stomach is instinct, the head is reason, and the heart is conscience. And so if you eliminate one of the three, you don't have a human person. But what differentiates man from cactuses and camels and whatever is the fact that you have reason and conscience. So in Lewis's book, that Amphibious Strength, this group of academics is conspiring to take over England to create a totalitarian state, to create a new man without a chest, i.e. without a conscience. So if we're simply robots that act impulsively, we have a big problem. Of course, there are many scientists who believe we are robots. Not, of course, they eliminate themselves from that consideration. They're not robots. Only the people that they are trying to manipulate are robots.
I was actually wondering if you could comment about impulsivity. Is that what you meant by impulsivity?
When he defined it as the urges, lust, and I forget the other things he just said, but humans have impulse, urges, whatever, and they're not governed by rational thought, is basically what I'm saying. So where does that, when you don't have rational thought, and not everyone does, and not everyone's capable of developing it. So where does that fit into this?
Yeah, I really recommend the Abolition of Man book because it discusses this three-part component of man and woman and how that guides. And that's why we being is defined by definition that way. But impulsivity is part of the problem.
Just a quick comment.
Yeah.
Can everybody hear the question?
No.
Okay,
Will you
please
repeat?
do something.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll repeat the
about
question.
impulsiveness,
Okay.
about impulsiveness.
Yeah.
A quick edit. My friend said that some people can't control their impulses, they can't govern their impulses, which I think of as appetites.
Yeah.
I once had a student, I was in college for 15 years, who was an ex-convict. And he became a convict because he beat his wife very badly. He served his time and came out, and I said, why did you do that? And he said, you don't know what it's like, Professor. Sometimes she just drives me crazy, and I lose it. And I said, have you ever lost it with someone 6'4" and 250 pounds? And he looked at me and said, no, I can control myself then. So impulse or appetite goes only so far. It can be.
I mean, I'm sure we've all lost our temper, and there's other things that happen. But that doesn't excuse what we choose to do.
If C.S. Lewis embraced what the Catholic social principle of subsidiarity, would you speculate on C.S. Lewis's approach to Brexit?
Well, I suspect Lewis was against centralizing power. And so I'm sure he would be suspicious of the European Union. He and Tolkien both believed in decentralization. The setting in The Lord of the Rings of the village is no accident. They viewed that kind of a setting to be the ideal setting for mankind, which had the connection with the community, and people had purpose in their work and in their relations, instead of being viewed as being manipulated by outside powers and forces.
In our discussion of Surprised by Joy, it was brought up that one ism you didn't talk about, feminism, may have been a big part of C.S. Lewis's philosophy. Because when he lost his mother, he was very much enthralled by that experience. Didn't have the maternal power through a lot of his upbringing. Then went to a school which was basically almost a fight between two sects, the Bloods and the Fags, and he was very much involved with that. And he identified more with the Fags and the Bloods because he felt apparently that they were more Christian-oriented, less totalitarian and dictatorial. Later, in Surprised by Joy, he expressed a real interest in the Nordic god Valkyrie and in Germanic gods who were all female. In other words, the head boss of those early religions was indeed a female. So the theory that we came up with as a group was perhaps C.S. Lewis was a feminist. Right, wrong, or crazy?
There's a book on the book table here. I think it's called C.S. Lewis and Women. Is that the title, Mary?
Women and C.S.
Women and C.S. I really recommend it, and that explores that Lewis also had a relationship with Mrs. Moore and her daughter. Lewis and his brother fought the kilns with her. Lewis got married late in life to Joy Davidman, which is a very profound story. Lewis was a medieval Renaissance scholar, and he believed that the modern world had lost touch and perspective on how to treat people. And the modernist view to him was reducing human beings to some trivial entity, material entity, which didn't have this robust sense of gender and masculinity, whatever it might be. Okay, it was all part of the human person.
Can you talk a little bit about the Tao as Lewis perceived it, because it seemed like he expressed it as something self-evident, but at the same time it doesn't seem quite that self-evident to everyone.
Well, he's saying that, he's basically saying, as I mentioned, that as the Apostle Paul said, it's written on everyone's heart. You have, the way Lewis put it, is you have this nagging sense of right and wrong, and you can't get it out of your head. Right? You may not understand how to apply it consistently, and appetite and other things will pop up and you'll succumb to that, or just your own ego, right, your own self-interest. You'll succumb to try to break the rules. But Lewis is saying the point is that in the abolition of man, he's saying even the progressive or whoever, the Nazi whatever, may have some noble goal of perpetuating X, saving people, feeding them, whatever it might be, which is part of the natural law. But the problem is that as human beings, we are tempted to break the rules of natural law to get there. We will be tempted to kill, to steal, to cover, whatever it might be, to get to that end. The problem with that view, that the end justifies the means, is that every means is an end in itself too. So for example, if you want to house the elderly who are sick, and the way you're going to fund that is to not go for 10 gas stations. You may get the money and be able to feed and serve the ill, the infirm, senior people. But when you're doing that, the fact that those 10 gas stations were robbed still is in reality. It has not gone away. So his point in Narnia books, for example, is the natural law is the deep magic. And the creatures in Narnia are tempted to break the deep magic. The White Witch, of course, tries to obliterate anything like that. And what happens is that you have a totally lifeless world that's frozen. But since everyone is tempted in this way, the only solution is for Aslan to redeem you like Edward was in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But as far as how do we behave, how do we serve each other, his point is that this deep magic of natural law should be the principles of what the civil law is based on.
I wonder if he ever wrote anything about the National Health Service in England.
He does in different ways. For example, in that Hideous Strength, he is satirically looking at government, health, and science. And if you read his work, you'll find all sorts of humorous digs at all sorts of things the government is doing. But he wasn't an economist, he wasn't a public policy expert, he was someone who was interested in first principles. So you want to get people to see these first principles and educate people in that regard, and let them then lead lives so they can understand what's going on around them.
Would you consider Lewis like Tolkien and Chesterton, who were influenced?
Could you repeat that again?
Distributionist? Would you consider Lewis a distributionist?
No.
Like Tolkien and Chesterton?
No, he actually wrote things that were critical of distributism. Unless it's voluntary. It's voluntary. Communities, for example, in the United States, before the welfare state, there were tens of thousands of organizations called mutual aid societies. And mutual aid societies were the most successful in those communities which were the hardest, most discriminated against. Immigrants, African Americans, Jews, others. And so these mutual aid societies were membership organizations. You pay a small fee and would cover unemployment insurance and disability and all sorts of other things. And they were very successful, but they could not compete after the Great Depression hit with the creation of the welfare state, in which people got the services for free. We still have remnants of many of the mutual aid entities, like Shriners Hospitals, the YMCA, YWCA, Catholic Charities, others were all part of this private system of civil society in which people would be part of the community and they would care about each other. But this was the theme of Tocqueville's book, Democracy in America. Tocqueville and his colleague came to the U.S. to study the American prison system. And when they were touring around, they discovered that in town after town, people spontaneously would put together an organization to rebuild someone's barn that burned down, or the mother had gotten ill, or whatever it might be. And so he was so amazed by this, he realized that in a free society, you had this ability for people who had this sense of empathy to come together for community purposes. And the reason he was so surprised was because in France, you couldn't, because everything that had to exist had to be approved by the king. So it's the contrast with a top-down system and the one that America had.
I think let's stop there. Let's say thanks again.
Thank you.
So in a moment we'll have a little break. Our next opportunity is to break into 8 small groups, which reminded me of a joke, one of those Last Judgment jokes. I can't remember exactly how it develops, but the punchline is, all you blessed come into the kingdom, the rest of you are going to break up into small groups. So I hope it won't be quite that kind of experience. I hope it might be a slightly heavenly experience. Before we get there, though, well, let me tell you where you're going first, so I don't have to come back up, and then we'll have a little commercial word from our bookstore sponsors. Byron Borger is going to tell us a little bit about their bookstore, and they're so good to be here with a wonderful sample of their wares. But so those of you who signed up for Stu Getz's small group, you're going to be in McCausland Chapel, which is over to the left here, as I understand, right? I will also be in McCausland Chapel, so those of you who signed up to talk with me about the grief observed, I'll be there. For the Downings, they'll be in Pemberton Hutchinson room, is that right?
Yes, I'll be there to direct.
There'll be people out there to direct you to go that. So Downings, Pemberton Hutchinson. Bruce Burke will be in the Beck room. It's a tongue twister. Bruce Burke, Beck. Lyons will be in the youth room. Tricia. In here, Theroux will stay in here. I guess they're expecting the biggest crowd for you, I guess. Jim Como will be in the sitting area to the left, out in the foyer there. And Boyer will be in the back of the room, back here. Oh yeah, back of the room. Okay, that's more notes. I'm reading other people's notes. Okay, so the key thing is you'll go to your small group. You'll spend some time kind of laying the groundwork for your conversation. Around noontime, boxed lunches will be available. You take a little break, grab a boxed lunch, come back into your small group, unless you're completely repelled by it, then you can just sneak away. Nice opportunity. And then you'll come back for more conversation, and we need to wrap it up and be back in here by 12:55 because our next presentation is at 1 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to call him Byron Borger, who is the co-owner, I guess, of the Hearts and Mind bookstore in Dallastown, PA, and say a couple words about it. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Again, my name is Byron Borger. My wife Beth and I opened an independent bookstore in Dallastown, which is just below York, over in York County, about 2 hours from here, 37 years ago. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we just said we want to carry everything C.S. Lewis wrote and almost anything we can find about him. That was just our passion. We started this independent bookstore. We're still afloat by the skin of our teeth, but we do a lot of events off-site, so we're really grateful that you invited us to be a part of this thrilling event. A lot of authors that we have known about over the years that we're thrilled to actually meet is just wonderful, so thanks for letting us be here. All the books back there, we have a section against the back wall of books by Lewis, lots and lots of stuff that he wrote, including some obscure stuff you may not have seen before. So really good stuff of Lewis, and then on the other side are books about Lewis, just remarkable stuff. Introductory level, academic level, specialized stuff, things on different topics of Lewis. So we got books by and about Lewis. In front of that, on the table kind of nearest where we're seated, are all the books by the speakers that are with us. And it is just a remarkable gathering, and everything is 10% off. We take credit cards. We'll be here till the end. We can send you a bill later. We can send your aunt a bill later, if you'd rather. Send it to the Deeper Magic address, and who knows what'll happen. Let me just take a moment and highlight just very quickly a couple of titles. I don't have time to tell you about all the books by all the speakers, but you've got some great folks here, so make sure you look at the authors' books that are with us. Get them to autograph stuff. Authors sort of like that. Last night, of course, you might, don't authors like that when they get to autograph stuff? It makes a nice gift, too. Buy your Christmas presents now. You know, David Downing did a bunch of books on Lewis, but one that is maybe not as well known and I think is just spectacular is called Into the Region of Awe. It's about mysticism in C.S. Lewis. If you like Henry Nouwen or Thomas Merton, those sorts of deeper contemplative writers, he unpacks, and of course Lewis was friends with Owen Barfield and almost dabbled in the occult. So there's fascinating, deeper mystical trends here. And there's hardly any books that get at this as well as Dr. Downing's book does. We have Crystal's book too, by the way, on semiotics, amazing stuff. So we're delighted to have those books. There's another book that David Downing, Dr. Downing, did as well that you just need to know about. We feel a little awkward, we put it under his name, but it's actually a C.S. Lewis book. But no, we didn't make a mistake. What this Pilgrim's Regress is one of the early books Lewis wrote that is mystifying to many people. And in Lewis's letters, he was asked to explain the darn thing. Well, David Downing, in a stroke of genius, got everything Lewis wrote about his own work and annotated it and put it in there. So Downing did this annotated version, so now for once and for all, we can all figure out what the Pilgrim's Regress is about. So this is the Pilgrim's Regress with the annotations by Lewis himself, put together by David Downing. So we have that under David's name. Yes, the demystification of the Pilgrim's Regress. Stephen Boyer's book is there. Stu Getz's book is there. James Como is a major scholar. We have a book on Harry Potter by Reverend Patricia Lyons. So we're just thrilled to have all these authors. Something about Como you should know. There's a little series from Oxford University Press called Very Short Introductions. There's hundreds of them. They pick the top scholars in a field, science, medicine, law, history, humanities, and they ask those great scholars to put in a very short introduction, scholarly work, simple, short, sweet. This book technically does not release until tomorrow. So we are breaking the law. No, not really. We are the first bookstore you've seen this at publicly. It's the first time the author has seen it publicly. This is a release party right here. Let's give him a hand of applause. This book just came out. You are seeing it for the first time. We're thrilled to have it. He is one of the great scholars. He put together this book, Remembering C.S. Lewis. And this is all of Lewis's friends, people you've never even heard of unless you've read his letters carefully, and some really remarkable individuals. Austin Farrar and all sorts of folks are in here reminiscing on what they knew about Lewis. And Jim put this together. A couple people have mentioned Lewis's relationship with women, and I have our understanding of the role of women. There's a book called Women and C.S. Lewis. Crystal Downing has a chapter in here. Michael Ward has a chapter in here. David Downing has a chapter in here. Everybody's in here. This is a wonderful book. You're going to get to hear Michael Ward shortly. He's got two books. One is the academic one you'll hear more about called Planet Narnia. The one next to it, a number of people said, what's the difference? It's cheaper, shorter, and abridged version. So you can take one or the other. We are here to serve you. Thanks for letting us be a part of it. It's great to be here.